7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Alright, fuck it, I'm going in.
Alright, what's up guys? So as promised, we're going to do a compression test. Now, this compression test can be done on any motorcycle, as long as it's, any lawnmower, basically any internal combustion engine that takes a spark plug, whether it's electric start or kick start. This here is a 2006 Honda CBR600RR. Many of my viewers already know what bike this is, so we're going to do on this. This is an inline 4 fuel injection bike, and we're going to test the compression. I do have a compressor gauge right here with the hose. Now you can pick this up at any Canadian Tire, Amazon, wherever. Just make sure that it does have more attachments for power sports, so like motorcycles, Sea-Doos, sleds, ATVs, whatever. That way it comes with a few more bit attachments. Gives you a few more, because you will need, for a motorcycle, it does take, the thread size is 10 millimeter. So the kit I bought came with like a 16, a 14, a 12, and a 10. It takes a 10 millimeter thread in the CBR600RR, and most likely in most motorcycles, it's going to take that adapter. Now what we're going to do is, you're going to want to pull all your spark plugs out of each cylinder, and then where your spark plug goes, you're going to want to actually stick this adapter. So once you pull all 4 of your spark plugs out, or if you have a twin or something, just the 2 of your spark plugs, take them out, and you're gonna start with, we're gonna start with cylinder 1, and then we're gonna work all the way over to cylinder 4. So I'm gonna drop this in and then thread it. You will need a 5/8 socket bit, as well as they are a pain in the ass. So if your motorcycle doesn't come with a tool, or if you don't have your toolkit to get your sockets and stuff like that out, a 3-inch extension and a U-joint extendable bit. That way you can kind of piece it in there. And then we're going to go ahead and start on with cylinder 1. Let's get to it. I'm going to try and give you guys a good view of this. So let's get started with this compression test. Make sure you have a full battery charged. If your bike is not kickstart. Make sure your key is off and spark plugs all removed. So let's get at her. So for cylinder 1, we're going to stick the 10 millimeter adapter bit into cylinder 1. Because they are a bitch to get at, I'm going to stick my socket in, and we're just going to thread the adapter into the plug socket. Hole. And if you do have problem getting your socket out for some reason, if it does fall in, Magna Pen is gold. You can just stick it in there. Alright, so we do have the adapter threaded into the plug, spark plug socket there. Now we're going to thread this end. It does help if your valve does have a quick release and also an air release valve. That way it'll make it easier, so you don't just have to unthread the hose every single time if you want to retest that cylinder. So we're going to thread this in. There really is no easy way. Basically just stick it down the spark plug socket hole and just spin the hose until it's on there nice and snug. It doesn't have to be torqued or super tight at all. So we're just going to get that on there until it's nice and snug. There we go. Now turn your ignition on. Oh, one more thing before you do this test. Either, undo your fuel tank and underneath unplug your actual fuel pump, or pull the fuse to your fuel pump. That way when you start your bike and go to check the compression, that no fuel gets put into your fuel injectors or anything, because your fuel tank will be basically cut off of power. You don't want to spewing fuel in while you're doing your compression test. So either unplug your fuel tank, and underneath there will be a black plug on the CBR600RR, or you can just pull the fuse. So either one, basically you just want to cut power to your fuel pump. So we're going to go ahead, turn our bike on, and it is good to start. Now what we're going to do is, when we do our compression test, you're going to want to hold the throttle open full throttle, and then you're going to want to hit the start button for about 5 to 7 seconds. The reason you want to hold it full throttle open is it does open a little valve inside the cylinder head, or inside the cylinder combustion chamber, and it creates like a vacuum, so you're able to fill the cylinder with as much compressed air as possible. If it's closed, you will get a slightly less reading on your compression than you would if you had your throttle fully open while you're trying to do this. So we're going to get started. I'll zoom this in for you. There we go. So again, full throttle, and then you're going to want to hit the start button for about 5 to 7 seconds, or until the needle on the gauge stops rising. Alright, so it looks like I got about 148 to 149 PSI, and on a 2003 to a 2006 CBR600RR, you should be getting 178 PSI in each cylinder. Now the thing is normally you would want to do a compression test on a warm engine, but the catch is most people that need to do compression tests, the bike isn't running, especially if it's been sitting around for a few years. The bike might not be running, and that's the whole point of you doing the compression test. So you are going to get a less of a reading doing a cold compression test than on doing the compression test on a warm engine. So I got about 150, and on a warm engine I should be getting around 178 PSI for the CBR600RR. So really I'm going to take 150 as not too bad, but we're not looking for exactly 178 PSI when I do this test. I'm doing this, testing each cylinder, because I want to see if there's inconsistencies. If I get 150 PSI across all 4 cylinders, chances are everything's good for compression wise. If I get 100 PSI on cylinder 1, and then cylinder 2, 3, and 4, I get 150 PSI, that's telling me either I have a piston ring that might not be sealing properly, most likely a head gasket, or potentially a stuck valve. Those are the 3 things. Chances are more likely a head gasket if that's the case. So we're going to go ahead and go and test cylinder number 2. Then we're going to test cylinder 3 and 4 and see what we get through there. So we're going to unthread this, and then we're going to go to cylinder 2. And if for some reason you dropped your socket in there again, magnetic pen, it is gold. Pulls that socket right out. Obviously the adapter is brass, so if for some reason after you unscrew it or unthread it and you can't get it out, just lightly stick the valve hose in, give it a couple threads, then just pull it out. There's a little tip just in case for some reason you get stuck and you gotta fish it out. So I got the adapter piece in there good. I'm going to thread the compression gauge hose in. But I can't stress enough that this is a compression test on a cold engine, so what we're looking for again is inconsistencies. We want each one of the 4 cylinders to be within about 10% of each other. We don't want one reading 110 and then the other 3 reading 160. That's a clear indication that one of the cylinders has low compression and that we potentially have a blown head gasket. So turn your bike on. You got your gauge on. You've already released the air, obviously, from your last test, but just hit your valve or air valve release just to make sure that you're at 0. So you got your bike on, and again, full throttle, baby, and then crank it up. So don't forget, full throttle, then hit the start for about 5 to 7 seconds or until the needle stops moving, which is about 5. So on this one here, it looks like I got about 150 PSI. Oh, you guys can see that. But I got about 150 PSI, 149, so basically exactly the same as cylinder 1. So that is good news. So far we're on par and each of the cylinders is reading correct. Again, this is a cold engine compression test. We're looking for inconsistencies. So release the air and then just unthread your gauge. And we're going to go ahead and test cylinder number 3 and see what it reads. So far, cylinders 1 and 2 are both at about 149 PSI. And on a warm engine, at running temp, it should be reading 178 PSI. We're going to do this, so I'm just going to thread this into the 3rd cylinder hole. Just that one right there. Just the hole's nice and snug. So we got the gauge. Just hit the air release valve just to make sure that it's straight at flat 0. So we got that. Make sure ignition's on. Again, this is cylinder 3. We're looking for around the 150 mark, just like we got with cylinders 1 and 2. Again, don't forget, full throttle and hold the the starter button, or if it's kickstart, keep kicking until the needle on the gauge stops moving, which will be about 5 to 7 seconds. So I'm looking at about 150, just barely over 150 PSI there. So that's not horrible. We're all within 10% of each other, easily less than 10% of each other. So far we are looking spot on good. So we're just going to release the air out of that valve and we're going to go ahead and get on to cylinder number 4. Alright, so we're going to go ahead, drop the adapter in, and then just kind of tighten it on there decent. Just nice and hand snug. Then go ahead and thread your gauge. This is probably the most annoying part just because it's a little hose you're trying to do that, but it's really not that hard once you set it in there nice and snug. Alright, so you can see right in there I got the hose into cylinder 4. Just press your air release valve just to make sure you're starting at a 0 PSI. Turn your ignition on. Again, you're going to want to hold it full throttle and then hold the starter button or keep kicking until the needle stops. About 5 to 7 seconds of trying to start your bike. Alright, so the gauge stopped rising and I am exactly at 150 psi. So all cylinders, all 4 cylinders, 1 through 4, are basically exactly the same. Release the air, and then just take your adapter bit out. And you've done your compression test. And it all looks good in terms of compression test on a cold engine. A warm engine would give you more accurate readings, but that only helps if your bike starts. So we've done the compression test. Another thing that you could do after you've done your initial compression test, if you do find that one cylinder is, let's say, reading 130 and the rest of them are reading 150, on that one cylinder that you do have a low compression reading on, you could drop a couple dabs of oil inside the actual cylinder head through the hole of where the spark plug goes, and then it'll drip down into the combustion chamber. That way you can redo a compression test, and the oil should, in theory, give you a slightly bit better seal around your piston rings. And then if you get a significant jump up, do your compression test with the oil in, and if you get a significant jump up, like it goes from 110 to like 160 or 150, like it's a big jump like that, the chances are pretty good that you're gonna have a bad piston ring on that cylinder. If it only jumps up like 10 or something like that, chances are it's not your piston ring, or your piston ring could be like really fucked up. And but chances are it's going to be your head gasket. But that is a good check. If you do put a little bit of oil in the cylinder that you had the low pressure reading on or compression reading on, and it does jump up quite a bit, like from 110 psi to like 150, 160 psi, then there's a good chance that you have a piston ring that's been damaged or bad. You could also have a stuck valve, which is creating low compression. I also want to add real quick that, like I said before, a cold compression test, you're going to get, a lower compression reading compared to doing a compression test on a warm engine, where you'll actually get a more accurate reading that should be at what the, your bike is specified to run at. Like I said, the CBR600RR is specified a compression rating of 178 psi. 150 isn't brutally low, but if you're getting like 60 psi even on a cold engine, chances are you got a blown head gasket or something's wrong. That is far too low even for a cold engine. It should be close, like it should be relatively close. Like if it's 178, it should be reading about 150 to 160. You could get around that mark. If it was reading 100 or something, I would know instantaneously that I had a problem, regardless if it's a cold engine. If I have, a bad seal on part of my head gasket, the chances of it affecting all 4 cylinders are pretty slim. It usually only affects like 1 or 2. With that being said, I can't 100% rule out a head gasket, but that is for a different video. This video, I just wanted to show you how to do a compression test on a motorcycle or ATV or any internal combustion engine that has an electric start or kickstart. Doesn't matter if it's a 2-cylinder, 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder. They all work the same. You can only do a compression test 1 cylinder at a time, and that's it. So hopefully you guys learned a little something. I do have more testing to do myself. After you do your initial compression test on all 4 cylinders, you can go ahead and redo the test again, 1 through 4, but instead adding a little bit of oil. It is always, even on a good cylinder, it will always go up in pressure a little bit. It's just how much pressure. If you're talking like 30-40% jump in compression, then the chances are you're going to have a bad piston ring on that cylinder. So that's it. Hopefully you guys learned something. That's a little compression test 101, I guess you could say. Pretty simple. Hopefully I can figure something out pretty soon. I am going to retest and start my bike. My compression does look good. It does look consistent. I could still have a damaged valve or head gasket or cylinder head cover. That gasket in there could also still be a little bit damaged, which is why it's letting a little bit of oil getting on my spark plugs. But at the same time, you know, these problems could have been just arose from, you know, the bike sitting for so long. Because it did sit for a year, almost a year and a half. It sat basically unstarted, unscathed, and then I got the new ECM and started up. So hopefully you guys have a good one. Learned a little something. It's a good idea to every once in a while, especially every few years, just do a compression test on your bike, kind of see where it's at, because it's not the word of God, this compression test, but what it does is give you a good idea of kind of what's going on in your engine. Same with, I'm a big believer you should check your spark plugs probably once a year, maybe at the end of riding season or at the beginning of riding season, just to kind of get a look at your spark plugs. It'll kind of give you a little bit of insight of what's going on inside your motor, on whether something sketchy is going on. You might be able to see a problem before it becomes a serious problem. So you guys have a good one. Take care, be safe, ride safe. I am dying to get this thing out, so peace.